the prediction is hundreds of millions of people will be dead. Okay? As for current forms of terrorism, as I said, there's an inverse correlation between getting involved in religion and in violence, and a very little influence of the madrasas. So it's nonsense to claim that Al-Qaeda's viral movement is a nihilistic movement. It's a deeply, deeply moral movement. The ultimate ambition of global jihad is to inaugurate a just and righteous society for believers the world over. There is no, let me go back one. At this point, the most dynamic terrorists belong to spontaneously self-generated, self-organized networks of friends and kin who are radicalized collectively and collectively decide to carry out terrorist operations. There were some claims made, just as an aside, about the theories of evolution of religion. John Haidt and David Sloan Wilson argued, I think they even said the byproduct theory was the dominant theory, although there were only 3 of us 20 years ago who had it, and that it should be replaced by group selection. When I asked Jonathan, can you give me a single empirical example of group selection, he says, well, no, I can't, but maybe David can. So as God is my witness and Darren, I asked David, can you give me a single example? He says, well, we'll talk about it next time. David's not here to defend himself. But I don't think there's any evidence whatsoever that religion is an adaptation or has a group selection function. None. Zero. Not the slightest bit of empirical evidence. And I think from a theoretical point of view, my test case is suicide bombers. I mean, death's the ultimate behavioral variable. These guys die for their group. But I find nothing remotely resembling group selection involved in what they do. These are mostly young men who form groups of fictive kin and die for one another, die for their buddies, and dreams of glory, the way people in armies do, in elite units. There is no indoctrination in the jihad. There's never has been. There's been no recruitment of the jihad. People don't come out and say, will you be a jihadi? People don't brainwash jihadis. Not a single case. Well, there is a single case. They come knocking at the door, even in Al-Qaeda's heyday. They came knocking at the door to Afghanistan, and Al-Qaeda accepted 10 to 15%. There is no Al-Qaeda in Europe. There never has been an Al-Qaeda in Europe. There's no agent of bin Laden out there trying to get people to bomb things. Young men try to find their way to Waziristan or Iraq, usually through a relative, sometimes through 6 degrees with a piece of paper, introducing one to the next. Sometimes they hook up with someone who had been in the training camp. Today they get about 3 weeks training if they get there, and that's less than 5% because Al-Qaeda is basically destroyed. Out of 1,000 of the core people who gave bayat to bin Laden, there are less than 100, and it's dwindling almost daily. They're all stuck in Waziristan, where the largest camp has 24 people. That's Mir Ali in northern Waziristan. And the 20 other camps are 6 people with 1 trainer apiece, and they're constantly fluid. That's it. That's the extent of Al-Qaeda. Okay? So it's not an existential threat against the United States. So you've got these young men. Even Mohammed Atta, we spent a lot of time with people in his group, families involved, the neighbors. They indoctrinated themselves. They holed up in an apartment for months on end, lived in a parallel universe, bought in 20 mattresses, and tried to imitate the life of the Prophet. The neighbors told us the place stunk. And these are middle-class neighborhoods outside the technical university in the Hamburg suburb of Harburg. Then they thought, maybe we'll go to Chechnya. Well, maybe not. Maybe we'll go to Kosovo, but the Albanians didn't want them for anything. And they said, okay, we'll go to Afghanistan, in which time Khalid Sheikh Mohammed said, hey, boss, we got something here. And the plot was done fairly rapidly. That was the first wave. These were mostly intelligent students, engineers, doctors, or would-be engineers and doctors. But that's not the case anymore. There's no financing for Al-Qaeda. This was the most expensive operation, 9/11, cost $400,000. The next most expensive operation is Madrid and Bali, and that costs less than $50,000, and it's all entirely self-funded. But because there's no funds being given to these people, they're forced to ride piggyback on already existing clandestine networks, and these are usually criminal networks, drug, credit card fraud, car parts. This is describing what it is. I mean, people, I hear the headlines in the New York Times. Oh, the Crevice plot. These are the plot to blow up Heathrow Airport. Al-Qaeda has been caught. Al-Qaeda has been tried. The Al-Qaeda threat has been dampened for now. This is a joke. These guys went to Pakistan. One of them had a relative who knew somebody who had been to a camp someday. They figured out they got themselves a trainer. They had to pay 3,500 euros to the trainer. They had to pay for the apartment. They had to pay for all their equipment, and then they went back. That's the biggest operation. The chief impetus for global jihad now comes from the U.S. war in Iraq, not from madrasas. People go to Iraq to fight and die. That's not where the problem is. They don't come back to Europe. People go to Pakistan to train and come back. That's where the danger is today in the world. Foreign fighters in Iraq are a very small part of the insurgency, just as the Arabs were a very small part of the insurgency in Afghanistan. And there is very little indication of any serious plot hatched from people coming back from Iraq. There's no Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. I can go on and all about this. This is a formal structure that the Moroccan intelligence gave us about how this Moroccan group is formed. And these guys all come from the neighborhood, and they hang around in cafes, and there's no formal structure, and bin Laden's not out there. And there's no hierarchical organization, command and control, recruitment, or brainwashing. It's about flat and fluid networks of friends, families, neighbors, schoolmates, workmates, and soccer buddies who self-radicalize and go looking for Al-Qaeda. Increasingly in cyberspace, it is the Internet that is giving them their greatest impetus to act today. This is just the Jama'ah Islamiyah. This is the most hierarchically structured of all the jihadi groups left after Al-Qaeda. And you can see we've plotted all the kinship relationships. It's mostly families. Here are some of the marriages involved in making the plots. Weddings is where people really make plots. Okay, wedding ceremonies and restaurants, not mosques. People go to mosques to pray. They don't go to mosques to plot. So let me just briefly go through one of these plots, and that's the Madrid plot, again, which was finally reached its end yesterday. So you started off back up in 1994 with those three guys up there at the top. They're Spaniards. These are losers. They work in a mine, and they sell dynamite to fishermen to blow up fish, and they get thrown in prison. These guys on the left, they all live in one square block in the town, in the neighborhood of Jama Mezouak in northern Morocco. And the guys on the right are mostly Syrian refugees from Hafez al-Assad's crackdown in the 1980s against the Muslim Brotherhood. These guys were tried as being the Al-Qaeda cell in Madrid after 9/11, of having received Atta and some of the others. The Garzón, Baltasar Garzón, who's this great hero for arresting all these guys, the Spanish Supreme Court overturned all their convictions. There was no evidence whatsoever that they had anything to do with Al-Qaeda. What happens is they get put in prison. Garzón puts them all in prison. And a group of young students, Moroccans, fairly alienated, start meeting with one another. And with Yarkas, he's that supposed leader, the Syrian leader of Al-Qaeda in Madrid. I should mention that the same thing is true of Mohammed Atta and his friends, Ramzi Bilnarshi, Ben Shehi, and Jarrar, and the others. The reason they got together in the university was because the Moroccans formed a group of friends in the restaurants and in the mosques, and all the people who weren't Moroccans, the double alienated guys, became the Hamburg plotters.